Okay, welcome back. We're going to talk about thinking versus feeling, but first let's go through a really quick recap. Okay, we've talked about extroversion versus introversion. That's dealing with your inner world and your outer world. That was in a previous video, as well as sensing versus intuition, which I got into detail in a previous video as well. Sensing and intuition, that is your perception, that's how you're perceiving the world. And now we're going to talk about your judgment. How are you making decisions and what method are you using to make judgments in the world? And that is your feeling versus thinking. So that's where we're at today. Okay, just another quick recap about extroverts and introverts. Extroverts, the dominant process is your process is dealing with the outside world. Introverts, your dominant process is dealing with the inside world. Okay, and I want to just make a point that whether you're extroverted or introverted, this will affect how the rest of your characteristics and personality traits manifest. And we'll get into that later on. Okay, also we went over sensing and intuition. So sensing, that's using your five senses and dealing with all the things that are around you, the here and now, what's going on now, what's relevant, what can I use. Intuition, that is your intellectual side or intellect, that's abstract thinking, possibilities, imagination. And sensing is the S and intuition is the N, even though it starts with an I. So you can see down here that the I is little and the N is big. So intuitives, they focus on concepts, and sensors are focusing on experiences, the here and now. Okay, so let's get started. Judging process, thinking versus feeling. All right, so there's two ways that you're making judgments. You could either use thinking, and that's kind of, we can see that as like your head or your brain, and feeling is more your heart, your emotions. But it's a little more than that too. Let's get into that into some more detail here. Okay, so I liked this little cartoon. I thought I would add it. You have the thinker over here. He's looking at everything going, these are the pros, these are the cons. This is, this is how thinkers are. They're using logic, they're using analysis and looking at the facts. But the feeling one over here is going, this may be the facts, but these are my values and these are the things that are important to me. And that's just a really good illustration of the thinking and versus feeling types. Okay, so let's take a deep dive into thinking. I put Einstein up here in the corner because Einstein was perhaps one of the most famous thinkers that we think about. He was an introverted thinker. So if you're going to use thinking, this is the best process to use to analyze a problem because you're going through doing analysis and going through everything. So this is using your head. So this could be a math problem. It could be a mechanical problem, some type of a system. And here I put that if you're an N and you're also a thinker, you may be using this to solve different types of problems, and they could be like physics or math or other things in life. If you're an S and you're a thinker, you may be dealing more with machines or mechanical issues or more practical matters in life. Thinking can be very profound. Thinkers can come up with they can come up with great conclusions. They use logic. They're very powerful. This is a very powerful decision-making method. But thinkers need a good strong perceptive process to have input for something to think about. Your thinking is only as good as the input that you have. And it's also only as good as the logic that you're using. So if you are a thinker and you're using poor logic, you're not going to have very good thinking. If you've got a good and a clear logic and you're a thinker, then this can be a very effective method of making decisions. Also, if you have good perception and you're getting good information put in, then you can use the information to come up with good conclusions. If you have a very weak perceiving method, like you don't have a strong S or a strong N, then your thinking will not have enough to think about and it will turn out to be very shallow. The drawback of thinking is it is not good to use with situations concerning people. Thinking is best to use with problems, systems, things, anything that's not people. Okay, feeling. Feelers, they make judgments on the way things feel, the way they feel about something. So, for example, let's say you're going into an interview and you're not going into the interview, you're the interviewer. So you've got two people coming and you're interviewing them. Your logic may tell you, okay, this person has the best skills, the best qualifications, and on paper, this person looks better. But when you meet that person, you may not like them as much. And let's say person B comes in and person B has, they have so okay skills, but they're very, you just like them. You like that person, you think that person will do good, and you have a good feeling about that person. A thinker may choose the one with the better qualifications and characteristics, where a feeler may choose the one that they have the best feeling about, the best overall feeling concerning everything. So that's one example how a thinker and a feeler would differ in judgment. Feelers are interested in people and things that concern people, and this also includes spirituality and psychology. Most of the time, from what I've observed through just people and everybody that I know, the people that are interested in any kind of spirituality tend to always be the F type of people. And that's because spirituality actually is something that has to do a lot with people. So therefore, it's an F characteristic. And also the F is where our compassion and empathy is. So while we could say a thinker may be an eye for an eye, a life for a life, a feeler may have more compassion and empathy and say, okay, why did this person take this life? Perhaps they could be redeemed, or, and this is a very, F is a very, our F side is a very human side that takes a lot of, it takes a lot of thinking, and it's a very special kind of judgment. And it's the best kind of judgment and the most, often the most accurate kind that you can use with people and concerning people. Interestingly enough, even if a person is a thinker, they still don't like to be judged with a thinking attitude. Even thinkers like to be judged with the feeling attitude. And feeling, like thinking, also needs adequately developed sensing process. So you have to have a strong N or a strong S to give your judgment something to judge, whether you're a feeler or a thinker. It's important to have a strong perception to add to your judgment. Okay, here's the stats. Thinkers are only 40% of the population. Feelers are a little more at about 60%. But the interesting thing about that is 65% of women are feelers, 60% of men are thinkers. So there's fewer thinkers, and more often than not, the thinkers are men. And I put the little picture here. You could see the man here. He's using logic, and the woman over here, she's more concerned with value, and we're not really sure why this is. Like, if this is how people have been socialized to be, that women are more pushed toward that, or perhaps it is because women have developed to be feelers because they often have children, and this is a very, of course, people-based thing, and they're often in situations in life more where they have to deal with people, whereas men are more often working on machines or computers or dealing with processes, trying to use trying to use logic to solve whatever problems they may have. Okay. So now's a good time to kind of think about where you might be on this list. I put the arrow here. This is where I think I'm at. Okay, so you always want to be inside this red circle. So you don't want to be way over here where you're thinking and you're not any in touch with your feeling. And you don't want to be way over here where you're just feeling and going off emotions and not using any logic. There are proper times to use feeling, there are proper times to use thinking, and we need both, and we need to be able to use both. One of the two will always be the dominant one. So I always go back to the analogy of the hands. I need both of my hands to do stuff, but my left hand is dominant, so I'll want to use this one more often. But if you go about your day and you take your least dominant hand and tie it behind your back and try to do all the stuff you need to do, you'll find it's very difficult. You need both. You need this hand and that hand to be able to do everything that you need to do. And your thinking and feeling is like that too. You need your thinking for the things that you need thinking to use thinking for, and the feeling to use things that you need to use feeling for. Now, thinkers, if you're a dominant thinker, you will have a tendency to try to use thinking when you should be using feeling, and dominant feelers may have a tendency to want to use feeling where they should be using thinking, and that's something to be aware of. And if you're aware of that, you can kind of get yourself to move closer to this line where you're using both the thinking and the feeling. There'll still always be a dominant one, and that's okay. Okay, so let's just go over some of the limitations about thinking and feeling. Thinkers tend to find feeling judgment unreliable. Okay, so let's talk about that for a minute. If you're a thinker and you are using logic and that's your strongest decision making attribute, you will look at a feeler and think, how can you make judgments based on feeling? And you may think that's illogical. Well, the thing that a thinker may not realize is a feeler's feeling judgment will be a lot more highly developed than the feeling judgment of a dominant thinker. So the thinker may not have good feeling judgment of their own, and they may assume that everybody else's feeling judgment is as unreliable as theirs is, which isn't always the case. Feelers can actually have a very strong development in that area, and especially when it comes to things that involve people, feelers actually are the more accurate decision makers there. Feelers can perceive thinkers as too critical. So feelers, if you're a feeler, you need to watch out and try to understand that thinkers want to say things the way they are. Thinkers like to point out flaws, and they like to point out what's wrong with things, and they like to point out limitations. So if you're a feeler, you got to keep that in mind and try not to get offended if a thinker sounds a little critical to you. This is just their nature. This is them pointing out things and them using their thinking judgment. Uh, Thinkers, sometimes, if you get too far on the thinking side, and you suppress the feeling side, it can just suddenly come up in an emotional outburst. So thinkers that have they're with feelings that are too neglected may have fits or outbursts, or it may just come out at times when they don't intend for it to, or they don't mean for it to come out like that. So that's something to be aware. If you're a thinker, you want to, going back to that little chart, you want to move more towards the middle to where your feelings are not so neglected. Okay, and then you just always got to keep in mind when you should be using each of these. If you're dealing in a situation with people or anything that has to do with that, perhaps it's an issue of punishment, especially, or an issue of how to handle a situation, maybe even hiring people. All of these things are things that are going to involve your feeling judgment to some degree. Whereas if you're trying to solve a math problem, there's really not a lot of place for feeling judgment there. Or if you're writing computer code or um, fixing a machine, building something, there could be a little room for feeling there, but usually you're going to be using thinking. Okay, and just to kind of wrap that up, be mindful of the other people's orientations. So if you're a thinker, try to use feeling judgment with people anytime you can. When you're, try to use that. If there comes a situation up where you're dealing with somebody else, try to use your values, your feeling, your empathy, your heart. And if you're a feeler, you need to understand when thinkers sound critical, and you need to not take things personally. So if you haven't read the book, The Four Agreements, if you're a feeler, that is a really good book to read. One of the things it says in there, one of the four agreements is not to take things personally. And that is a really big deal. Also, if you're a feeler, there are times when you're going to need to use your thinking judgment to solve problems. And it's good to practice that and build up a strong ability on your thinking side as well. So now that we've talked about introversion, extroversion, but we've also talked about sensing and feeling, or sensing and intuition and feeling and thinking, we can kind of look at some of these combinations and talk about that a little bit. Okay. If you are a sensing type and a feeling type, these are some occupations that you might be good at. I put a general practitioner here because a sensing person, they're going to look at, if they're in medical field and they're a doctor, they're going to be, and you have a sick patient come in, they're going to be looking at the color of your skin. They're going to be looking at all the signs, like, checking the heartbeat, checking the eyes and the mouth and the tonsils and whatever things they need to check. And these are all sensing areas of things. And then feeling, you're going to be interested in people. So therefore, a general practitioner would be somebody who's a sensing feeling type, if you have both of these as dominant in your personality type. Perhaps a teacher, grade school teacher, you could do child care. Care for the elderly is another one. Nursing. Also cosmetology, so making faces look pretty, and hair. Those are things that sensors and feelers that combination would make you more interested in, and art as well. Okay, if you're sensing and thinking, if you've got these two together, a sensing thinking type, you might be more interested in engineering, mechanical stuff, accounting, maybe a lawyer. Lawyers are sensing lawyers are very good because they skim through the details, perhaps the details of a contract, and thinkers let them use that logic to pick out things. And of course, the same thing with accounting. An accountant is Sensors are better accountants than intuitives because sensing people like to look at details, and accounting involves a lot of detail-oriented work where you're looking at numbers and you're trying to be accurate. And also, none of these jobs would involve anything to do with the feeling. So these would all be thinking type of jobs dominant. Whoops, that's not what I wanted to do. Oh, let's go back here. Sorry, guys. Okay. Intuitive feeling. So if you are an intuitive, so an N type, and that's partnered with feeling, so you're going to be using your intuition and your feeling judgment. So you're interested in people, counselors. So intuition, remember, is the abstract thought. Because I have mentioned this in the sensing and intuition video, that sensing people have great intuition too, but their intuition is different. Sensing people will look at situations and things, and they can just know things. Like they'll know if somebody's lying. They can pick up on things in the environment, and they get a type of an intuition from that intuitive people don't have. Intuitive people are focused on their abstract thoughts. That's the intellectual thought. Okay, counselors, they like to talk about abstract thought, the way things should be, what should happen. Um, Intuitive feeling type also can be scientists and professors, because the intuitiveness is the N. If you have the N in your personality type, it is the one that determines if you're interested in science. So even if you're an NF, many NFs still go into scientific fields, and many of them are also professors. Professors are also a job that deals with people too, and intellect as well. And this is where you also have the intuitive feeling people are also the clergy, metaphysics students. These are the people that are interested in spirituality, and often the more abstract kind of spirituality. Okay, and then let's look at intuitive thinking. That was Einstein. He was an intuitive thinker. So those will be your programming types, programmers. Some of those could also be sensing types as well. A programmer could also be a sensing thinking, but often they're intuitive thinkers. There's a lot of math involved in that. Scientists, they're definitely scientists, and a intuitive thinker. So what they found is that scientists are more often intuitive thinking people. However, when an intuitive feeling person becomes a scientist, they are equally as brilliant or as good of a scientist as an intuitive thinker, if whatever thing that they're interested in, or whatever they're focused on, whatever their interest is, they focus on that, and they can have just as good focus as the intuitive thinker. Intuitive feeling scientists may be more likely to go into something like medicine, or something that also involves people, like health or medicine or things like that. And intuitive thinking people may study something more like radio waves or electricity, or researching other things like that. Whereas an intuitive feeler, they might be interested in researching longevity or something that deals a little bit with people. And these will have scientists may deal a little bit less with people. Okay, they could also be the actuaries, the analysts. Those are intuitive thinkers. So I just thought it would be interesting to go over some of these combinations. Of course, this list is just general. It's not all inclusive. These just give you some general ideas about these types. Okay. So that wraps up our feeling versus thinking. If you have questions, you can comment below in the video, and I'll try to answer them the best that I can. And join me for the next video, which will be on judgment versus perception, your J and P type. And that's the last letter in your Myers Briggs personality type. And we'll also go over how the introversion and extroversion and the J and the P, all of that affects your feeling and your perception and your judgment. So I think you'll find that very interesting. All right, see you for the next video. Bye.